The Buffalo Bills invested heavily into the defensive end position this offseason. Did they pull the right strings? We're exploring that today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Well, folks, welcome in. Today, we are discussing defensive ends, and we are going to explore the defensive ends like we have the offensive positions, where I consider the reasons to be excited, the reasons to be concerned, and the reasons to be curious. And obviously, there's been some additions to this group, and there's a lot to consider as we get ready for this 2025 season. I do want to start with the reasons to be excited. And the number one thing isn't the new arrivals for me. It's not the new coaches. It's Gregory Rousseau and his trajectory. Just signed the 4-year contract extension that pays him $20 million a season on average. And that's a great value deal for the Buffalo Bills, making him the 14th highest paid edge in the NFL. And he is coming off a terrific season. In 2024, Greg Rousseau matched a career high with 8 sacks and set new career highs with tackles, 53, tackles for loss, 16, quarterback pressures, 63, quarterback hits, 24, and forced fumbles with 3. Really starting to put it together. Played the highest volume of snaps of his career. And remember, this dude is young. He just turned 25 a few months ago. He's a guy that only played 478 total snaps in college. That transition from being a high school safety and wide receiver to the defensive line at Miami. And he's coming off a year where he was top 10 in the entire NFL among pressures for defensive ends. And on that list with him of guys that are in the top 10 of total quarterback pressures among the defensive ends, I promise you he's the best run defender. It's a good football player. No, he's not Myles Garrett. He's not Trey Hendrickson. He's not Nick Bosa. He's not TJ Watt. The Bills are not paying him like he's those players. You have to appreciate him for who he is. And who he is an ascending player. Do we want more sack production? Of course. And I hope that as the Bills become better around him, whether that's from a coverage perspective or complementary pass rush, that he does convert a higher percentage of the pressures into sacks. And yes, sacks are the ultimate thing as a pass rusher. I love sacks. It's my favorite thing. Like, I might like sacks more than touchdowns, to be honest with you. I'm only kidding there, but I love sacks. Pressures matter too. When you look at a quarterback, the average quarterback in the NFL, when pressured versus not pressured, their completion percentage goes down between 15 and 20%, and their passer rating goes down over 30 points. It matters a ton. You get those hurried throws, you get those sped up decisions, and you get takeaways, you get errant throws, and you affect quarterbacks, right? Greg Rousseau's a good football player, and I think there's more meat on the bone for where he can go. So the number one thing I'm excited about for the Bills defensive ends, it's the trajectory of Gregory Rousseau, what he's proven, how young he is, and how I believe that the stuff around him, the ecosystem around him being better can unlock even more production after he's coming off a year where he set career highs pretty much in every meaningful statistical category. Number two, in terms of reasons I'm excited, I will now talk about the new arrivals. Those being Joey Bosa, Michael Hoecht, and Landon Jackson, the Bills' third-round pick. We'll talk about the injury stuff with Bosa. That's obviously part of it. But when Bosa's right, he's a high-impact player. There's no doubt about it. And I watched all of his film from last year, and I thought he started to play his best football towards the end of the year when he admitted that he was the most healthy. And I thought his best game was in the postseason against Houston. You saw him be highly disruptive, winning with power, versatile in terms of alignments. A guy that has know-how, right? He's a top 5 pick. When he's on, he's one of the premier defensive ends in the league. And I'm excited for him to be here. I'm concerned. We'll talk about reasons to be concerned, but his existence, he played 14 games last year, right? Injuries are a problem. But there's also reasons to be intrigued with how the Bills can maximize him. And obviously there's a lot riding on this year for Joey Bosa. He's not a million years old. He turns 30 in July. And if he goes out and has the year that he's capable of having and can stay healthy, it's going to mean a massive contract in the offseason, whether it's from the Bills or some other team. Every incentive imaginable exists for Joey Bosa to go out and ball out and change the narratives of what the last several years have been, where it's been about injuries. Let's make it about playmaking and be the player that he can be. I'm excited for his arrival. I'm excited for Michael Hoecht. Very unique player. I remember when Lorenzo Alexander was on this team, and we started to have conversations about replacing Lorenzo Alexander in the Lorenzo Alexander role, and there's never really a guy that made sense to do that. Well, welcome to the mix, Michael Hoecht. Highly versatile player. Love the trajectory. The skill set is really attractive. He's crazy athletic, can do a lot of different things, make an impact as a run defender and a pass rusher, can play in space a little bit, can make your fronts more multiple. I'm excited to see how the Bills incorporate him. McDermott and Babich have admitted that they've been kind of following him for a while. There's going to be a vision and a plan, and I'm excited to see what it is. And he's on a 3-year deal. And then there's Landon Jackson, third-round pick, the 12th edge rusher drafted. And I think that's important for me to call out because this was an unbelievable year for defensive end talent. Landon Jackson, in a typical draft, has no business being the 12th defensive end drafted. The Bills benefit from how deep this class was to get a player like him at the top of the second or the top of the third round. And big time athlete, length, power, high character dude. Not a lot of pressure for him to come in and be an immediate answer, but you think about Bosa and Epenesa on expiring contracts. You get him going this year, you can really get more volume out of him next year. Or look, he comes out and balls out and he gets a ton of run this year. The possibilities are certainly there. And I like the skill set and I like the addition, and really strengthens the overall top to bottom of this room when you add a talent like Landon Jackson. The third thing I want to get to under reasons to be excited is the fact that it's a contract year for AJ Epenesa. Now, look, I don't think AJ Epenesa is going to reinvent himself as a football player, but there's a lot of reason for him to go out and have a great season. He's finishing up the second year of a 2-year, $12 million contract. He turns 27 in September. Has had 6 or more sacks in each of the last 3 seasons. Last year, logged a career-high 8 tackles for loss, 2 forced fumbles, 26 run stuffs. Those are the most of his career. In fact, when it comes to defending the run, his previous career high in run stuffs was 12. He got 26 last year. And he also played a lot more snaps. He played a career-high 55% of snaps last year. That's the most of his career by 14%. Now, his pressure rate was not as strong, right? His pressure totals didn't increase with more snaps. And I think that speaks to AJ Epenesa being best in a off-the-bench, part-time role. You don't really want him being a north of 50% of snaps player. But whenever it's a contract year for a player, there's just a little bit more in the tank, right? Eric Wood, I love listening to Eric Wood. I listen to all of his podcasts centered on Buffalo. You should listen to him. And he always talked about whenever they were going up against an opponent, they would identify which defensive linemen are in contract years because they're going to go out there and play just a little harder than they normally do. Well, It's time for the Bills to reap the benefits of a contract year from AJ Epenesa. And look, I don't think the Bills should be thinking about a contract extension for AJ Epenesa. I think you probably let him play this thing out and you look at your scenario next year, and it's probably not going to include AJ Epenesa. I wouldn't want to sign him to another 2-year deal that pays him, if he has a good year, it could be $7, $8, $9, $10 million, right? I hope that's what he gets, something like that. But the point being here is that you should get a highly motivated AJ Epenesa that won't be asked to play as many snaps. And I think that recipe leads to the best version of AJ Epenesa in 2025. So reasons to be excited: Greg Rousseau's trajectory, the new arrivals of Bosa, Hoecht, and Jackson, and then what the Bills can get out of AJ Epenesa in a contract year. All right, coming up next, the reasons to be concerned. We'll explore that and more, so folks, be sure to stick with me. We've all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Gametime comes in. Gametime makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. Ever wonder what your view will actually look like before you buy? The app shows you a panoramic seat view, so there are no surprises. And speaking of no surprises, with Gametime, the price you see is the price you pay. No hidden fees. So take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, folks, we just got into all these reasons to be excited. Now let's flip it upside down and be honest about the things to be concerned about. And the number one thing is Joey Bosa's injury history. It's just the reality. You look back at this thing, 2024, he missed 3 games with a hip injury. 2023, he missed 1 game with a hamstring, 1 game with a toe fracture, and 7 games with a foot sprain. 2022, he missed 12 games due to a core muscle repair. 2020, concussion that caused him to miss 2 games, and then 2 more games later in the season with a concussion. 2018, a foot injury, missed 9 games. 2017, hamstring injury, missed 4 games. Not great. 9 seasons in the league, missed 42 games. I'm not a math guy, but that's like 3 seasons worth of games in 9 years that he missed. He's played 28 of a possible 51 games over the last 3 seasons. Now, look, he did play 14 last year. That's great. But the injury stuff is absolutely a valid concern. My initial stance on Joey Bosa, as we talked about the opportunities for the Bills this offseason to go out and sign a defensive end, was I like the player and I like the idea if he could be healthy, but I'd let somebody else figure out if he could stay healthy or not. And then as the market shifted and you realize that a Myles Garrett trade wasn't going to happen and that a Trey Hendrickson trade wasn't going to happen and that Josh Sweat was going to go to his former defensive coordinator in Arizona and play out there, it's like, well, what are you going to do? You need to take a swing here to find some impact, and you go with Bosa. But the concern, of course, is the injuries. Now, this is, if there's a piece of a silver lining here where you might be able to find some hope, is that I think the Bills' rotation and how they like to, work in a lot of different guys maximized Leonard Floyd in his 1 season in Buffalo and Von Miller the last 2 years. Of course, you're trying to get the most out of Von Miller post that ACL that really kind of took away from what was a really strong start to his time in Buffalo. I think he benefited from being able to play in that rotation with less snaps and putting him in more in high leverage moments. The Bills have kind of shown the ability and the willingness to use a player like that. And I hope there's a similar plan and a similar effect and impact on Bosa that allows him to stay healthy and help this team when it matters the most. But until we get through the season and Joey Bosa's not banged up and not available when the Bills need him, that's going to be something that I'm concerned about. So number one is Bosa's injury history, and I would imagine that'd be the number one thing for anybody that's trying to have an honest conversation about what you're concerned about regarding the Bills' defensive ends in 2025. Number 2 is Michael Hoecht's Week 8 arrival. Look, it's just not an ideal situation. Sign a guy to a 3-year deal. You get excited about the possibilities that come with the skill set and the athleticism, and then he's going to miss the first 6 games of the season due to a PED suspension. Not ideal. And I think what makes it even less ideal is that he's not a traditional player. There's not a, hey, you're going to have this role that so many other people have, and not only would you be able to step in and do the role, but other people would be able to do it. I think Michael Hoecht's one of those players where you play the game differently because he exists. It's kind of like Mac Hollins, where I get questions about, well, Mac Hollins did all these things for the Bills. He was an outside receiver. He played inline tight end. He was a gunner on the punt team. Did a lot of these little things, these kind of unique roles. Well, there's no replacing that. Like, a lot of players will do those different things, but there's no one for one. So that's why I find it to be such a not ideal situation, because he's such a unique player. It just creates an unusual circumstance that all of a sudden in week 8, after you played 6 games, you've had a bye week. Oh, here comes a guy that is suddenly going to be a big part of your defensive equation. Now, that could be an exciting proposition. The Bills could be in a position where, boy, we're like, thank God this guy's coming. We need some juice on defense. And ultimately, I do think he should elevate the defense. But there's nothing ideal about him stepping in week 8. So what does that look like? And that doesn't even get into the roster piece where you got to make room for him, which we'll talk about here in the next segment. So yeah, I'm concerned about Michael Hoecht and the journey to get to the start of the season, and you prepare for the season with him, and then bye-bye. We'll see you in 6 weeks. So it's a really unique situation, and it's just not ideal. Number 3 under reasons to be concerned is the Bills' history with defensive end investments under McDermott and Bean, and how important it is to get this right. Yeah, I'm excited about Bosa and Hoecht and Landon Jackson. I am. I like those players. But the Bills haven't been right about defensive end investments as much as I wish they were. I don't look back at the signing of Mario Addison or Trent Murphy and think fondly of those investments. Von Miller. The injury is obviously a huge part of it, but it didn't really work out. You didn't give Von Miller a 6-year, $120 million deal for 9.5 games of impact. Boogie Basham in the second round. AJ Epenesa, the Bills have salvaged it. He's been a good depth player, but I think of a mid-second round pick as somebody that should be a solid starter for you. And that's not Epenesa. He's a good depth player, but he's nobody's preferred starter. Shouldn't be. Those aren't good moves. Gregory Rousseau is absolutely a hit. The 1-year deal for Leonard Floyd, I think that worked out pretty good. But the point being is you need this to work, and you're not necessarily reflecting on a resume of, man, they figured it out with those draft picks or those free agent signings. So hopefully that led to better decision-making processes, right? And you've learned things and you can apply it to the next opportunities that you get. And hopefully that happens with what the Bills have done to bring in Bosa, Hoecht, and Jackson. But I'm mindful of how many times this stuff hasn't worked. So put that under the reasons to be concerned. So to summarize reasons to be concerned, it's Bosa's injury history. It's the onboarding of Michael Hoecht, the disappearing and then welcoming back in week 8 and all the dynamics that go into that. And it's how important it is for the Bills to get this right. And we don't necessarily look back on history and feel like it tells the story we hope that it would. All right, next up, reasons to be curious. And there's a lot to unpack there, including the arrival of some new coaches. Talk about that here next. Folks, be sure to stick with me. All right, folks, welcome back. We're talking reasons to be curious about the Buffalo Bills defensive ends in 2025. Number one thing I have down is the new coaching influences. Marcus West is the Bills' defensive line coach by label, right? He's titled that. And he was that last year for sure. He was that. The Bills move on from Eric Washington because he becomes a defensive coordinator for the Bears. And Marcus West is a defensive line coach. And if you've paid attention to the video that's come out of the OTAs and mandatory minicamp, it's abundantly clear to me that the number one voice for this defensive line is Ryan Nielsen. It's not Marcus West. Marcus West is holding blocking dummies, and Ryan Nielsen is doing the hands-on coaching and instruction and running drills. It's not hard to tell who's actually the lead voice in the room. It's not Marcus West, who has the title of defensive line coach. Ryan Nielsen, who has the title of senior defensive assistant, is the guy. And I'm curious about this because Marcus West is a guy that, I think is highly thought of, but not necessarily a guy with a ton of experience. His first year in the National Football League as a coach was in 2022 with the Bills as the assistant D-line coach. So he's the assistant D-line coach in 22 and 23. Then he's the full-time, the lead D-line coach in 24. And now he's still got the title, but it doesn't look like he's the lead name. He's the lead voice in the room. And it looks like it's Ryan Nielsen. And that's potentially a really good thing. Ryan Nielsen has a very strong history of coaching D-line. He really made his name with the Saints and a lot of great player development there. And then he got an opportunity to be the DC for the Saints, then the Falcons, then the Jaguars. You saw the Falcons defense improve a lot with him, but not the Jaguars. The Jaguars defense was objectively terrible last year. That doesn't mean that Ryan Nielsen can't coach D-line, right? And so I'm excited for him. He's been regarded as one of the up-and-coming defensive minds in the NFL. And I think if you look specifically during his time with the Saints and that 1 year with the Falcons, there's a good story to tell. So I'm excited to see how he can impact things. It's off the McDermott tree, right? It's been Eric Washington ran that group for a while. You feel like that's McDermott influence. This is going outside the box here to change things, hopefully. And I'm excited to see how it goes. Not to mention the Bills bring in Jason Raprovich, who is a native of Clarence. He played college ball at SUNY Cortland. I got it right, SUNY, right? I heard from so many people. The last time I said SUNY Cortland, I said it a different way, and I must have got 10 emails from people letting me know that that's not how you say SUNY. But I got it now. Thank you for setting the record straight there for me. SUNY, noted. And he was actually the Bills' defensive assistant from 23 to 2016. He was the Bills' D-line coach in 2016. Spent some time as a defensive assistant with Jacksonville and Green Bay for multiple years, has a good reputation. He was part of that cold front defense in Buffalo with Marcel Darius and Kyle Williams and Jerry Hughes and Mario Williams. And so you got some pretty big-time coaching influx here to this defensive line room, and that certainly has me curious. So that's my number one thing under reasons to be curious. Number two, for reasons to be curious, is Javon Solomon. He's kind of like the forgotten guy here. Day 3 draft pick last year and played a lot of special teams, which matters a ton. That's a big deal for a late round pick that's wanting to kind of stick around. Being able to show that you can help on teams is going to keep you on the roster and gives you more chances to develop. And I think Javon Solomon did that in year 1. And while he didn't play a meaningful amount of snaps, there was some pretty encouraging things that happened when he rushed the passer. Now, the run defense was deplorable. We won't even get into that. But the pass rush was good. And that's the story with Javon Solomon, a guy coming out of college, out of Troy, that had 32 and a half sacks during his time in college and 16 during his last season. In his first season in the NFL, he had 89 pass rush snaps that were very much scattered throughout the year. And on those 89 pass rush snaps, he had 2 sacks and 14 pressures. That's a lot of production for 89 rush snaps. And so I think the Hoecht suspension actually helps a guy like Javon Solomon because there might be some opportunities for him to do the pass rush stuff that maybe the Bills thought Hoecht can handle. And I don't know. He's just a different skill set. He's not a player that I would have expected the Bills to draft. Brandon Beane even said that. He thought, we thought Javon Solomon would be more of a player that the 3-4 teams would like, but it got to the point in the draft where it just felt like we needed to pick him. So how does this go? I'm curious. I mean, what does he need to do during camp and preseason to get snaps over, a lot of the guys ahead of him? How does he carve out a role? I'm very curious to see how this plays out, and he's certainly not forgotten in my mind. Then lastly, under reasons to be curious, I have what on earth is the roster move going to be that gets Michael Hoecht back on the roster post-suspension? If you look at this and you assume there's not any injuries, you've got Greg Rousseau, Joey Bosa, AJ Epenesa, Landon Jackson, Javon Solomon. Those are 5. You're not going to keep 6. That maybe you might keep 6. Probably not. You probably want 5. Who's falling off this roster? Now, an injury could take care of it, where you might put somebody on injured reserve, or it doesn't necessarily have to be one of those players. It could be at a different position. But what further complicates this is you also have Larry Ogunjobi coming back off a suspension. So you're going to need to find a spot for 2 defensive linemen. Really the bye week, right? The Bills play the first 6 weeks of the season, then they have a week 7 bye, then they come out of the bye and play Carolina in week 8. So you'll have the opportunity to kind of sort through it and figure it out. But ultimately, to make space for those players, somebody that's on the active roster has to come off. And you could cut somebody. You could put them on injured reserve. What does that look like? Very curious. And hopefully it's not an injury. I hope that there's nobody on injured reserve, and that you really do just have to make a very tough decision. But I'm going to be thinking about that until it happens, and what how you move the pieces around to make it make sense. So reasons to be curious: new coaching influences, Javon Solomon, and the roster move that brings Hoecht on the roster post suspension. All right, folks. Hope you enjoyed this conversation. You know me, I love talking D-line, so we'll definitely get to defensive tackles later in the week and a whole lot more content. So don't miss anything. Make sure that you're subscribed. We'd love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.